Karen had always been the kind of person who lived for adventure. Her friends often joked that she could turn even the most ordinary day into something extraordinary, whether it was skydiving over the Swiss Alps or getting lost in a bustling Moroccan market. Karen thrived on excitement and new experiences. So when she decided to visit London during her summer vacation, everyone expected her to come back with wild stories. And they weren't wrong. On her second day in the city, Karen found herself standing outside Buckingham Palace, surrounded by tourists, snapping photos and marveling at the grandeur of the royal residence. The air buzzed with energy as people waited eagerly for the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Karen joined the crowd, her camera phone at the ready, capturing every detail of the ornate gates, gleaming statues, and perfectly manicured gardens. But what truly caught her attention were the royal guards themselves. Dressed in their striking crimson tunics and towering bearskin hats, the guards stood like living statues, completely still, their faces expressionless. Karen watched them closely, fascinated by their discipline. No matter how many tourists posed for selfies beside them, shouted jokes, or waved wildly in their faces, the guards didn't so much as blink. Their stoic demeanor intrigued Karen. She wondered what it must feel like to stand there for hours without moving, ignoring everything around you. As the ceremony began, Karen moved closer, craning her neck to get a better view. The rhythmic marching of soldiers, the blare of trumpets, and the synchronized movements of the guards created an awe-inspiring spectacle. Yet, amidst all the pageantry, Karen's mind started to wander. She thought about videos she'd seen online where people tried to make the guards laugh or react. Some threw confetti, others danced ridiculously close to them. None succeeded. Inspired by these antics, Karen felt a mischievous spark ignite within her. What if I tried something different? She mused silently, something no one else has done before. Her eyes darted to the small canister of pepper spray tucked inside her bag, a precaution she carried while traveling alone in unfamiliar places. An idea formed in her head, reckless and impulsive. Surely, a quick spritz wouldn't cause any real harm, right? Just enough to see if the guard would flinch or show any sign of emotion. It seemed harmless enough at the moment, almost like a harmless prank. After all, how serious could the consequences be? Without giving herself time to think twice, Karen tightened her grip on the pepper spray and stepped closer to the nearest guard. Her heart pounded in her chest, partly from excitement and partly from nerves. For a brief moment, doubt flickered in her mind. Was this really a good idea? Before she could talk herself out of it, though, Karen took a deep breath and prepared to act. Little did she know, the next few seconds would change everything, for both her and the unsuspecting guard. Karen's fingers trembled as she clutched the small canister of pepper spray in her hand. She glanced around, half expecting someone to stop her or call out what she was about to do. But the crowd was distracted. Some were busy filming the ceremony, others chatting excitedly, and a few simply admiring the guard's precision. No one paid any attention to Karen as she inched closer to the nearest guard, her pulse racing faster with each step. The guard stood tall and immovable, his posture impeccable, his gaze fixed straight ahead. His expression gave nothing away, not even a flicker of annoyance at the tourists buzzing around him. To Karen, he looked almost robotic, like a statue carved from stone. This only fueled her determination. Come on, she thought to herself, trying to silence the tiny voice in her head that whispered this might be a bad idea. It's just a little prank. What's the worst that could happen? Summoning her courage, Karen raised the pepper spray slightly, aiming it discreetly toward the guard's face. Her heart felt like it was going to leap out of her chest. For a split second, she hesitated, wondering if she should turn back. But then she remembered all those viral videos online, the ones where people tried to make the guards laugh or react, and decided this would be her moment to shine. With a deep breath, she pressed the nozzle. A fine mist shot out, catching the guard squarely in the eyes. At first, there was no reaction. It was as if the spray hadn't registered yet. Karen held her breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then suddenly, the guard recoiled sharply, his body jerking backward as he instinctively brought his hands up to shield his face. The once stoic figure now stumbled, groaning in pain as the burning sensation took hold. His breathing became labored, and his movements were frantic, completely unlike the calm demeanor he'd maintained moments earlier. Panic surged through Karen as she realized the gravity of what she'd done. This wasn't some lighthearted prank gone wrong. It was real, and it had consequences. The other guards nearby immediately noticed their comrade's distress. One shouted into his radio, while another rushed over to assist the affected guard, guiding him away from the crowd. Their voices were sharp and urgent, cutting through the previously cheerful atmosphere of the courtyard. Tourists began to scream and scatter, unsure of what exactly had happened but sensing danger. Some ducked behind barriers, while others grabbed their children and ran toward the exits. The orderly scene dissolved into chaos within seconds. Cameras clicked wildly as people captured the unfolding drama, unaware that Karen was the one responsible. She stood frozen, still holding the pepper spray, her mind blank except for one overwhelming thought. What have I done? Her initial excitement had vanished, replaced by a wave of dread. She watched as more guards and security personnel arrived on the scene, their faces grim with concern. They scanned the area, clearly searching for the person who had caused the disruption. Karen's stomach churned as she realized they'd figure it out soon enough. Her legs felt like jelly, and her palms were slick with sweat. Every instinct told her to run, to disappear into the crowd before anyone noticed her, but she knew it was too late. As the injured guard continued to struggle, gasping for air and blinking furiously to clear his eyes, Karen felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly knocked the wind out of her. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She had never intended to hurt anyone. She just wanted to see if she could make the guard flinch. Now, standing amidst the confusion and panic she had caused, Karen understood that her actions had spiraled far beyond anything she could control. And as the authorities closed in, her fleeting moment of mischief turned into something much darker. A decision she would regret for the rest of her life. The courtyard, once filled with the cheerful chatter of tourists and the rhythmic beats of the changing of the guard ceremony, was now a scene of utter chaos. People screamed and scrambled in every direction, unsure of what had just happened or whether they were in danger. Parents clutched their children tightly, pulling them away from the commotion. Others froze in place, staring wide-eyed as security personnel rushed toward the injured guard, their movements sharp and urgent. Karen stood rooted to the spot, her mind racing, but her body paralyzed. She watched in horror as the guard she had sprayed stumbled back, his face contorted in pain. His hands clawed at his eyes, trying desperately to wipe away the burning sensation. The sight made Karen's stomach churn. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. In her head, the prank had been harmless. A quick spritz, maybe a flinch, and then everyone would laugh it off. But this was something else entirely. Other guards quickly surrounded their colleague, forming a protective barrier between him and the crowd. One barked orders into his radio, his voice tense and clipped. Another knelt beside the injured man, speaking softly but firmly as he guided him away from the public eye. The once stoic figures now moved with alarming speed, their disciplined calm shattered by the unexpected attack. Tourists continued to scatter, some ducking behind barriers while others sprinted toward the exits. The air buzzed with panic, and Karen felt like she was drowning in it. Her grip on the pepper spray loosened, and the small canister slipped from her fingers, landing with a soft thud on the ground. It was as if letting go of the object might somehow erase what she had done. But the damage was already done. The chaos around her grew louder. Shouts from security, cries from frightened visitors, and the distant wail of sirens approaching the palace gates. Karen's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Her throat tightened, making it hard to breathe. "Move," a sharp voice commanded, cutting through the noise. Karen turned to see two uniformed officers pushing their way through the crowd, their eyes scanning the area intently. They weren't shouting at her, not yet, but she could feel their gaze narrowing in her direction. She glanced down at the pepper spray lying at her feet, damning evidence of her reckless act. Her first instinct was to kick it away, to distance herself from it somehow, but she knew it was too late. Everyone had seen her standing there. Someone must have noticed her holding the canister moments before the guard collapsed. As the officers drew closer, Karen's mind raced with excuses. It was an accident, she rehearsed silently. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I thought it would be funny. But even as she formed the words in her head, she knew they sounded hollow. Funny. Nothing about this was funny. A man was in pain, dozens of people were terrified, and one of the most iconic traditions in British history had been disrupted, all because of her stupid, impulsive decision. Her legs finally obeyed her brain, and she took a hesitant step backward, melting into the remnants of the crowd that hadn't yet fled. For a moment, she entertained the idea of running, of disappearing into the maze of London streets and pretending none of this had ever happened. But where would she go? How far could she really run before someone caught up to her? And more importantly, did she even deserve to escape? Before she could decide, a hand clamped down firmly on her shoulder, spinning her around. Karen found herself face to face with one of the officers, his expression stern and unyielding. "You're coming with us," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Behind him, another officer held up the pepper spray canister, holding it out like a piece of damning evidence. Karen's breath hitched in her throat as reality crashed over her like a tidal wave. There was no denying it now. She was caught. As the officers led her away, Karen stole one last glance at the scene behind her. The injured guard was being helped into a waiting vehicle, his face still twisted in discomfort. The other guards stood rigidly, their expressions unreadable, but undoubtedly filled with anger and betrayal. The once majestic courtyard now felt tainted, its beauty overshadowed by the mess she had created. Tears welled up in Karen's eyes as the weight of her actions settled heavily on her shoulders. This wasn't just a prank gone wrong. It was a disaster, and she hadn't. Karen's world shrank to the cold, sterile walls of a police station as she sat slumped in a hard-backed chair, her hands cuffed behind her back. The room buzzed with activity, officers typing furiously on keyboards, radios crackling with updates, and the occasional shout from down the hall. But none of it mattered to Karen. Her mind was trapped in a loop, replaying the events at Buckingham Palace over and over again. Each memory felt heavier than the last, pressing down on her chest until she could barely breathe. Across the table, a stern-looking detective stared at her, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His nameplate read Detective Harris, but his demeanor made it clear he wasn't interested in pleasantries. "Let's start with why you thought it was acceptable to assault a member of the Queen's Guard," he said, his voice low but firm. The question hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and unrelenting. Karen swallowed hard, her throat dry and scratchy. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. How could she explain something that even she didn't fully understand? It had all happened so fast, a reckless impulse fueled by curiosity and boredom. Now, sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of the interrogation room, she realized how absurd it sounded. A prank. Was that really what she was going to call it? I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she finally managed to stammer, her voice trembling. I wanted to see if he'd react. I thought it would be funny." Even as the words left her lips, she cringed at how pathetic they sounded. Funny. Nothing about this was funny. Not the guard's pained gasps, not the chaos she had caused, and certainly not the angry glares she received from the officers surrounding her. Detective Harris leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His eyes bore into hers, searching for sincerity, or perhaps just an excuse to end this conversation quickly. "Funny," he repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You assaulted someone whose job is to protect one of the most important institutions in this country." Dozens of people were put in danger because of your joke. Tourists panicked. Security protocols were triggered. And let's not forget the fact that you used a weapon in a public space. Karen flinched at the word weapon. Pepper spray was supposed to be a safety tool, something she carried to feel secure while traveling alone. But now, hearing it described as a weapon made her stomach twist into knots. She hadn't thought of it that way when she pulled the trigger. To her, it had been harmless, a silly prop for a harmless prank. Now, it felt like proof of her recklessness. The detective continued, listing off charges she might face: assault, disorderly conduct, possession of a prohibited item on royal grounds. The list went on. Each charge hit her like a punch to the gut. Assault. She hadn't meant to assault anyone. Disorderly conduct. Sure, the courtyard had turned chaotic, but she never imagined things would escalate so quickly. As for the pepper spray, she hadn't even known carrying it onto palace grounds was illegal. Ignorance, however, offered no protection here. "Do you understand the seriousness of what you've done?" Detective Harris asked, breaking through her thoughts. Karen nodded numbly, tears welling up in her eyes. She understood now, or at least, she was beginning to. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a violation of trust, respect, and law. The guards weren't robots or props for entertainment. They were real people with real responsibilities, and she had disrespected them in the worst possible way. As the interrogation dragged on, Karen found herself apologizing repeatedly, though the words felt hollow. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I swear." But apologies couldn't undo the damage. They couldn't erase the pain she had caused or the disruption she had created. All they could do was serve as a reminder of how far she had fallen. From an adventurous traveler seeking new experiences to someone sitting in a police station, facing the consequences of her own foolishness. By the time the questioning ended, Karen was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. She was led to a holding cell, where she sank onto a narrow bench, her head in her hands. For the first time in hours, the noise around her faded, leaving only silence and the crushing weight of regret. The days following Karen's arrest blurred together into a haze of guilt, anxiety, and public scrutiny. News of the incident spread like wildfire, dominating headlines across the UK and beyond. Social media erupted with outrage as photos and videos of the chaotic scene at Buckingham Palace circulated online. Memes mocking her actions popped up alongside angry comments calling for justice. Some even labeled her Pepper Spray Karen, a nickname that stung more than she cared to admit. For the first time in her life, Karen felt truly alone. Locked in a holding cell, Karen had plenty of time to reflect on what had happened. She replayed every detail: the guard's pained expression, the panicked crowd, the stern voices of the officers arresting her. And each memory felt like a fresh wound. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a deep sense of shame. She couldn't stop thinking about how reckless and selfish she had been. What was supposed to be a harmless prank had spiraled out of control, causing harm to innocent people and tarnishing one of the most respected traditions in British culture. Her lawyer visited her regularly, explaining the legal ramifications of her actions. Assaulting a member of the Queen's Guard wasn't just frowned upon. It was considered a serious offense under British law. The injured guard had required medical attention, and his recovery would take weeks. On top of that, the disruption at the palace had triggered security alerts, leading to significant costs and logistical challenges. Karen listened quietly, nodding along as her lawyer outlined potential penalties: hefty fines, community service, and possibly even jail time. The weight of these consequences settled heavily on her shoulders. "You need to issue a public apology," her lawyer advised during one visit. "It won't fix everything, but it might show people you regret your actions and are willing to take responsibility." At first, Karen hesitated. The thought of facing the public after everything that had happened terrified her. But deep down, she knew he was right. If there was any chance of making amends, even in a small way, She had to try. A few days later, Karen stood before a bank of microphones in a crowded press room, her hands trembling and her heart pounding. Cameras flashed relentlessly as reporters jotted down notes, their expressions skeptical. Taking a shaky breath, Karen began to speak. "I want to start by saying I am deeply sorry for my actions," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I did was wrong, incredibly disrespectful, and completely unacceptable. I never intended to hurt anyone or cause such disruption. I acted impulsively without thinking about the consequences, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting it." As she spoke, tears streamed down her face, blurring her vision. She apologized to the injured guard, to the other guards who had been affected, and to the countless tourists whose day had been ruined because of her stupidity. She acknowledged the gravity of disrespecting such an important tradition and vowed to learn from her mistakes. By the end of her statement, her voice cracked with emotion, and she bowed her head, unable to meet the piercing gazes of the journalists in front of her. The reaction to her apology was mixed. Some dismissed it as insincere, accusing her of only apologizing to save herself from harsher punishment. Others, however, saw genuine remorse in her words and believed she deserved a second chance. Letters poured in from around the world, some filled with anger and condemnation, others offering forgiveness and encouragement. One letter, written by a retired soldier, struck a chord with Karen. "We all make mistakes," he wrote. "What matters is what you do next. Use this experience to grow and become better." Karen clung to those words like a lifeline. She knew earning back trust wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to try. In the quiet moments alone in her cell, she started journaling, pouring her thoughts onto paper as a way to process her emotions. She wrote about her regrets, her fears, and her hopes for the future. Slowly but surely, she began to see this ordeal not just as a mistake, but as a turning point, a chance to confront her own flaws and strive to be someone worthy of redemption. Though the road ahead promised to be long and difficult, Karen resolved to face it head-on. For now, all she could do was wait for her court date and hope that her sincere apology would count for something when the time came to face judgment. Karen's court date arrived sooner than she expected, and the courtroom was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and even a few tourists who had been present during the incident at Buckingham Palace. Cameras clicked incessantly as she walked in, her head bowed and her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wore a plain gray sweater and jeans, an outfit chosen not to draw attention but one that still couldn't shield her from the sea of judgmental stares. The air felt heavy, charged with tension, and Karen's heart raced as she took her seat beside her lawyer. The judge entered the room, and everyone rose respectfully. As proceedings began, the prosecution laid out the case against Karen, emphasizing the seriousness of her actions. They described how her reckless behavior had endangered public safety, disrupted a national ceremony, and caused physical harm to a member of the Queen's Guard. Photos of the chaotic scene were presented as evidence, showing the injured guard being helped away and the frightened crowd scattering in panic. Each image served as a painful reminder of what Karen had done, and she found herself struggling to hold back tears. When it was her turn to speak, Karen stood slowly, her legs trembling beneath her. Her lawyer had prepared her for this moment, coaching her on how to express genuine remorse without sounding defensive or self-serving. But no amount of preparation could calm the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Clutching a folded piece of paper, the notes she had written during her time in the holding cell, she began to read aloud. "I stand here today filled with regret and sorrow for my actions," she said, her voice shaky but clear. "What I did was thoughtless, disrespectful, and completely unacceptable. I never intended to hurt anyone, but I understand now that intentions don't erase consequences. My behavior disrespected not only the guards but also the tradition they represent, and the thousands of people who came to witness it. I deeply apologize to the injured guard, his colleagues, and everyone affected by my stupidity." She paused, glancing briefly at the gallery where a few members of the public sat quietly, their expressions unreadable. Taking another deep breath, she continued, "This experience has taught me lessons I will carry for the rest of my life. It has shown me the importance of respecting boundaries, considering the impact of my actions, and understanding the value of traditions I may not fully grasp. I hope to use this as an opportunity to grow and become someone better, not just for myself, but for those I've wronged." Her words hung in the air as the courtroom fell silent. Some people nodded slightly, while others remained stoic. When she finished speaking, Karen handed the note to her lawyer and returned to her seat, feeling both drained and relieved. She had said everything she could, leaving her fate in the hands of the judge. After deliberation, the verdict came. Karen was found guilty of assault and disorderly conduct. She was fined heavily, ordered to pay the injured guard's medical expenses, and sentenced to 200 hours of community service. Additionally, she was banned from returning to the UK for 5 years. While the penalties were severe, they were less harsh than they could have been, a decision many attributed to her sincere apology and willingness to take responsibility. In the weeks that followed, Karen threw herself into her community service work. Assigned to assist at a local organization focused on promoting responsible tourism, she spent hours helping travelers understand cultural norms and the importance of respecting landmarks and traditions. At first, the job felt like penance, a constant reminder of her mistake. But over time, she began to see it differently. Listening to stories from other volunteers and interacting with tourists eager to learn, Karen realized she had a unique chance to turn her misstep into something meaningful. She also started attending workshops on mindfulness and ethical travel, determined to educate herself further. These sessions opened her eyes to perspectives she hadn't considered before. How small actions can ripple outward, affecting others in ways we might never anticipate. Slowly, Karen began to rebuild her confidence, not as the bold adventurer she once was, but as someone humbled by experience and committed to doing better. Though the scars of her past decision would always linger, Karen embraced the opportunity to rewrite her story, not as a cautionary tale, but as a journey toward redemption. Karen's journey toward redemption wasn't easy, but it was one she approached with determination. Her community service assignment placed her at a small nonprofit organization dedicated to educating travelers about cultural sensitivity and responsible tourism. At first, the work felt awkward and uncomfortable. She dreaded facing new people, worried they might recognize her or judge her for what she had done. But as days turned into weeks, Karen began to find purpose in the tasks assigned to her. Her role involved creating informational pamphlets, leading workshops for tourists, and even speaking directly to groups about the importance of respecting local customs and traditions. It was during these talks that Karen found her voice again, not the impulsive, carefree voice from before, but a thoughtful and reflective one. She shared snippets of her own experience, carefully framing it as a lesson rather than an excuse. "I learned the hard way that our actions have consequences," she would say, her tone steady and sincere. "Even something that seems small or harmless can hurt others if we're not mindful." The tourists who attended her sessions were often surprised by her honesty. Some came into the room skeptical, expecting a lecture filled with dry rules and warnings. Instead, they left inspired, carrying with them a deeper understanding of how their behavior could affect the places they visited and the people who lived there. Karen's story resonated with many, especially younger travelers who admitted to having made similar mistakes in the past. Hearing her talk openly about regret and growth gave them permission to reflect on their own choices. As part of her sentence, Karen was also required to write a formal letter of apology to the injured guard. This task proved more difficult than she anticipated. How could she possibly put into words the depth of her remorse? After several drafts, she settled on a heartfelt message acknowledging the pain she had caused and expressing gratitude for his service. To her surprise, he responded, not with anger, but with grace. In his reply, he thanked her for her apology and admitted that while her actions had been hurtful, her willingness to learn from them mattered more. That single letter became a turning point for Karen, reinforcing her belief that redemption was possible. Her efforts didn't stop there. Determined to make amends beyond her legal obligations, Karen began volunteering at events aimed at fostering goodwill between visitors and locals. She helped organize cultural exchange programs where tourists could interact with residents and gain first-hand insight into their lives. These initiatives allowed Karen to channel her energy into something positive, transforming her guilt into action. Over time, Karen noticed subtle changes in herself. The weight of shame that had once crushed her started to lift, replaced by a sense of accomplishment. People around her, colleagues, volunteers, and even strangers, began to see her not as pepper spray Karen, but as someone committed to making a difference. Her transformation earned her respect within the nonprofit community, and she was eventually invited to speak at larger forums, including travel conferences and educational seminars. Despite her progress, Karen knew she couldn't undo the past. The nickname still popped up occasionally online, and some critics refused to forgive her. But instead of letting negativity consume her, she chose to focus on the good she could do moving forward. Each workshop she led, each pamphlet she designed, and each conversation she had with a traveler became a step toward rebuilding her reputation and proving to herself that she was capable of change. By the time her community service hours were completed, Karen had become a passionate advocate for ethical travel. Though banned from returning to the UK for 5 years, she vowed to use her remaining time abroad wisely, spreading awareness wherever she went. For Karen, this chapter of her life wasn't just about paying for her mistakes. It was about ensuring those mistakes wouldn't define her forever. And as she looked ahead, she felt hopeful, not because she had erased her past, but because she had found a way to build a better future.